development is important, and this can help us see which are the positive impacts. I will now introduce you to our speakers. First, we have Heikki Hiilamo. I don't know if you are connected. Well, yes, he's here. Hello.
És professor en política social a la Universitat de Helsinki, a Finlàndia, i doctor en política social i en salut pública. La Mireia Borrell és analista en cap d'Ivalua, que és l'Institut Català d'Avaluació de Polítiques Públiques, i és doctora en política econòmica europea per la London School of Economics.
She's got a PhD at the London School of Economics. More than questions, I'd like to ask you about some of the main axes of this roundtable, but you can contribute freely if you wish. First of all, what are the validity? What would be the robustness from a methodological point of view from this pilot project, and what would be the assessment of the pilot project, and also what would be the quantitative and qualitative advantages of the pilot project, and what would be the added value. And if we have a broader perspective when dealing with results, I'd like to talk about the role that the media play when we assess if we were successful or not. What would be the relationship of media and the interpretation of results and the real results of the pilot project? And I'd like also to propose much more theoretical debate, always setting the yesterday messages as well as the design. My question would be, at the end of the day, society discusses of the positive elements of a pilot project and if it worked, or maybe if from an ethical perspective, what really entails a pilot project, it would be great for a society, such as the non-conditions of the basic income strategy. So please, I'd like to ask you to respect your time, and then we'll have time for questions and answers. Thank you so much. Please, Heikki, go ahead.
So I will be the first one to speak, right? Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation. So can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, so I will carry on. So thank you very much for the invitation and congratulations for such an for putting up such a very interesting seminar and very interesting project. Just a few words about my background. So I work as a professor of social policy and I've been following very closely the Finnish basic income experiment, which took place between 2017 and 2018. And I have been commenting and doing research on that. Most recently, we got the register data and we have carried out on some analysis on the demographic effects of the Finnish basic income experiment. I've also got to know quite well the experiments in Ontario, the experiment in Barcelona, and the experiment in the Netherlands, which I cover in my upcoming book on participation income. So those experiments, which I know are somehow, I will give my comments with the background I have on those experiments. I also got to know a little bit about the Gyeonggi province experiment, which I think it's really perhaps the most relevant for the Catalonia pilot. So I was asked to comment on the internal validity of the experiment, external validity, then the role of press and media coverage, pros and cons of qualitative versus quantitative research, then whether this is a political or scientific endeavor, and lastly, discussions on ethical or scientific grounds. So first, some words about the internal validity. So you have chosen a very unique approach where you are not conducting a randomized control trial, but a saturation study. Well, the previous studies which have been conducted on negative income tax in the US and Canada, well, especially in Canada, they included this saturation element side by side with a RCT study. That was also the idea for the Ontario pilot, which was called out by the incoming Conservative government in Ontario. Also, the research group which made the original plans for the Finnish pilot, they also proposed a combination of RCT and saturation study. So I think the problem with the saturation study alone is that it's difficult to find a community for a comparison group. There are always some unobserved heterogeneity across different communities. So I think that's the kind of a weak point of the study. So if I would have the opportunity to make decisions, I would combine saturation study with an RCT. But I realized that saturation study is important to study the community level effects, and that type of information is missing from the previous, or mostly missing from the previous experiments. Well, we have some of that data coming from the Gyeonggi province pilot. Then the internal validity. For the internal validity, it's very important to define clearly the goals of the experiment, because the evaluation is always conducted against the goals. So if basically the research question is whether goals were reached or not, and more specifically, you would need to have hypotheses for each outcome variable. And now you have it seems like this is a kind of an explorative endeavor, since you have a large number of different outcome variables, and I think it will be difficult to communicate with the decision makers with such a wide range of outcome variables. I'm not suggesting you to drop some of the outcome variables, but perhaps to give more emphasis on specific outcome variables of greater interest. Then about the external validity. With external validity, I understand that whether these results are generalizable for beyond the experiment sites, beyond also beyond Catalonia, and perhaps even beyond Spain. I think that's quite problematic, since there are always contextual factors which play a role, and the contextual factors relate, for example, to social security system in a specific country. So in Spain, you have just introduced the Ingreso Minimum Vital, which is a very unique program. So that's going to have some sort of effect on the external validity of the results. But I don't think if that's such a big problem, since the idea with this type of experiment is mostly to facilitate political debate on regional level or on national level, and that the external validity is only vital for generalizability within the regional context or the national context. If there is international interest, I think that's just an added advantage, but it shouldn't be the main goal. Then the question concerning press and media coverage. I think that comes back to the fact that the evaluation is always against the initial goals of the project. And if you haven't defined clearly the goals of a project, it's difficult to somehow control the publicity in media, in traditional media and in social media. So basically, basic income experiments, they have been discussed within two very different frames. One is employment promotion or activation, and the other one is well-being. And whether you want to emphasize the employment effects or well-being effects, I think that should be clearly defined when you plan your media strategy. The problem with the Finnish experiment was that it was very much domestically discussed within the activation frame, and therefore the experiment failed to make any bigger political impact in Finland. Then the discussion concerning the pros and cons of qualitative and quantitative research. I think they are both needed, and I think the research plan is well prepared in a sense that both elements are there. Of course, in the media and in the political communication, it's perhaps more important to emphasize the quantitative side of the results, because politicians, they always want to know about figures. They want to know how much it's going to cost and what will be the effects or outcomes in monetary terms. Then whether this is going to be a political or scientific endeavor, I'm not so familiar with the Catalonian context to make any in-depth comments on that dimension. I think it's both. And there is scientific value in this kind of project, but it very much comes down to the research design and implementation of the pilot and the quality of data. Reading through your original proposal, I was a bit skeptical, or well, I didn't actually got the idea how the data is collected from the control group. So there was a remark concerning the participants that they would be obliged to respond to the surveys. But what about those who are in the control group? How will you be able to collect data from them? And if you don't have data from the control group, it's very difficult to evaluate the actual effects. And of course, there is always the problem with attrition and also the problem with non-response, both in the control and experiment group when you collect survey data. So I think it should be emphasized that it's as easy as possible for the participants in both groups to actually submit the survey data. And I would also emphasize the role of register data. That's also the experience from the Finnish experiment. The register data gives you the most reliable estimates for effects. For the political side, I think it's very much comes down to the communication strategy, and if the goals of the experiment meet with the political decision makers' own goals, then it would make sense, this kind of a pilot as a means to enrich the political debate around basic income. Finally, I was asked to comment on whether there will be questions on ethical dimensions, for example, whether unconditionality is important or not, or on scientific. Well, I think it depends on the political frame. If the political frame is on activation, then of course it's important to discuss whether conditionality is required or not. But if the discussion is on well-being, then it's a different story. So that's something which I would emphasize. And then finally, I was somehow wondering how this experiment is connected to taxation and how it's going to be financed, because that will be also important for the political decision makers to know how much it would cost if this type of policy would be actually implemented. And since you're collecting data on surveys, I would consult the evaluation studies on the Gyeonggi province pilot, because they have produced very good reports, very interesting results, which are based on surveys. So I think that's a good example for evaluating this type of a project. So that's all from me, and I would be happy to respond to any arising questions or comments. So thank you for your attention.
Moltes gràcies, Heikki, per la teva...
Thank you so much, Heikki, for your presentation. I'm sure that later there will be questions for you. Now, Mireia, your turn. Thank you. I have prepared a presentation.
Vale. Perfecte. Vale. Gràcies. Bueno, jo soc la Mireia.
My name is Mireia from Ivalua. I will try and shorten my presentation, and if something is not clear enough, you can ask me later. First, before talking about the internal and the external validation and the questions suggested by Aida, I would like to say that all these issues are part of the counseling that we are offering. So from the beginning, we were engaged, and so what we do is, first we have a design phase. So we are counseling. We are counseling about the theory of change, as Heikki has said, which are the objectives of the pilot, which are the information sources, and also the internal and external validation. So this is important because if it is not well done, or if it's not done in an accessible way, then it will be more difficult for us to get information from the pilot. Of course, the resources are important, so the better the design, the better the assessment will be. Then the assessment phase is, we are also in charge of that, and we also have a counseling role here to try and see whether things are going well or if there are problems in the implementation phase, or which is the feeling amongst people about the functioning of everything. So this is important to know how the implementation is going. But it's also important because without knowing how the implementation was, we won't have an appropriate assessment, because if there were issues with implementation, or if some people did not want to accept the basic income, or if it did not get to everybody that it should get to, of course, this will have a consequence, an impact on the evaluation. So points A and B, this is our counseling towards the office, and the point C is the assessment stage from 2024 until 2026. And here we have this implementation assessment, as I said, and also the impact assessment. So we will have to see what was the impact of this policy. Okay. So this presentation is focused on the design phase, which is the current phase. And I think it's important to say that this is work in progress. So we are still talking with the office and the bureau, and maybe what we say today, maybe tomorrow will change. Well, not maybe tomorrow, but in some time. Everything is open yet. About now the internal and external validation. First, I would like to clarify something which is maybe obvious or not, but which is the difference between internal and external validation. Internal validation is when we say that there are accurate conclusions for the studied population. So if this is the studied population, we want the conclusions to be accurate. This means that the results are not biased. So we don't want to have problems with omitted variables or inverse causality. These are the two main problems in terms of the internal validation. This is different when we talk about external validation. External validation means whether these conclusions that aren't biased, it's about seeing if this can be generalized beyond the general population. What happens? Sometimes this is not the case. And so what happens oftentimes in the RCTs or the pilot schemes is that the external validation is a little bit left aside. I will talk about that later. Now I'm focusing on the internal validation. So the first thing that we need to know is what this pilot scheme wants to study. According to our conversations, they want to study the universality, and so the aggregated effects of the universal basic income. In other words, we know that universality, as Leire said before, this is an oxymoron in a way, because it cannot be universal because this is a pilot, so it's limited in itself, and it cannot be permanent because it's only for a 2-year time. Universality, we cannot test it, but maybe we can try and simulate it. Here, the idea is, if instead of giving a basic income unconditionally to a specific population, according their resource level, we give it to a group independently from their incomes, what would be the effects? If we believe that the aggregated effects aren't relevant, so to say that it will be the same thing as individual, then we could have an individual RCT, and that's it. This is what we want to test versus this other thing. So the difference is in red. Sorry, but we don't see the screen. And this will have an impact on the design. And the designs that we are suggesting now, as I say, it is work in progress, and there are several on the table. They all have pros and cons in order to measure those aggregated effects. So which are the implications when testing the universality? If we were not interested on universality, we would have a normal RCT design. But if we are interested in universality, is because we believe that when it is given to everyone, the aggregated effects change. So let's see which are these aggregated effects. So how can they change? And this will be important to see the different designs later. So first, the aggregated effect, the most typical one, are the direct effects related on size. So for example, if we have here a population in black, low-income population, if we give a basic income depending on the level of incomes, the social work demand will decrease. What would happen if we would give a universal basic income? Well, it would decrease even more. So, okay, this is a direct effect related to the size. But is it the only direct effect? No, there are other direct effects. For example, indirect effects. If we continue with the same example, we have this group of people and we give them basic income dependent on their income level. What happens here? Well, the same thing. We see that there is a decrease in the demand of social services, but if it is universal, it decreases even more. But what can happen? And these are hypotheses. That's what we are working on with the theory of change, okay? This is just an example. What might happen? Well, for example, that the service quality will decrease. Why? Because if these social services aren't really required, the administration can say, okay, we will remove some resources from those social services and we will put those resources to another place. So what we say, services for the poor are poor services. So these indirect effects are also interesting for us and we would like to measure them. Other effects that we will have, these spillover effects, which are basically, if here in this room we would give a basic income to the right-hand side and not to the left-hand side, we'll have some effects here. But if we have effects here and these impacts on the behavior of those that do not have received it, these are the spillover effects. And these are very important because they are quite difficult to quantify. And this is something important when we want to assess the universality. Here, another example on the participation on the employment market. We have a basic income which is not universal. What would happen? Well, what would happen is that people with precarious jobs would quit the job market. It's obvious because if they have an income already, so they don't want to have this precarious job. Here in red, we see the spillover effect, and this is just a hypothesis. Maybe when some of them quit the job market, those that are unemployed say, okay, I will take that job. This is the spillover effect because the person quitting the job market hasn't received the basic income, but this has an impact on someone else, which is not part of the basic income, okay? If it is universal, what can happen? Well, that everyone is leaving the precarious jobs. So for many more people quit these precarious jobs, so there is less demand and maybe the salaries would go up. Okay. In the design, we should try and reflect those differences. Last effect that we are also interested in, or before that, another example of a spillover that maybe we won't be able to see. And it shows us that the pilot schemes will have limits. Okay, it's okay if they are specified because we know that all pilots can't do everything. So we have the same example here. The community participation, what would happen? So people receiving the basic income are more engaged in their community, but others don't. So here the idea is, if, for example, I see that someone is getting more involved, I can say, okay, good. But if all of a sudden I see you all more engaged, I will think, wow, maybe I should do the same thing. That's the spillover effect. What happens that if everyone is getting this basic income, maybe everyone will get more involved in the community and we won't be able to know what part stems from the spillover effect and what not. So this type of spillover effect will be more difficult to measure. doesn't mean that we cannot measure the community participation or engagement. I do believe that yes, we will be able to measure, but we won't know which is the exact mechanism. If this is a spillover effect or it's because they just wanted to get engaged for a long time and they didn't have time to, for example. The last aggregated effect that we are interested in and that will have an impact on design are the heterogeneous effects. Here, the example is the female participation in the job market. Okay. Again, the two groups. People getting the basic income quit precarious jobs and they start getting taking care of their children, for example. So we have less women on the job market. What happens if it's given to everyone? Well, maybe the behaviors will be very different. Economists say, for example, if we take the caring time, if you believe that this is a lower good, and if you say, I don't want to do that, I would rather not staying home and spending my time taking care of dependent people. Maybe you could pay someone for that and you could do another thing. But some people will maybe say, no, I like to take care of others. I enjoy that. So I will quit my job and I will care for others full time. So which is the effect of the female employment? We don't know. So we will have to compare what happens universally to what happens non-universally, okay? To see these heterogeneous effects. Sometimes they are associated to the incomes. That's why they are important. So, recap. We are analyzing these aggregated effects because we believe that it will have an impact on the design of the income pilot, basic income, sorry. So if we are interested in aggregated effects, we will have to have a design that will allow us to see the spillover effects and the other effects that I mentioned. First design is the easiest, but in theory, this is not the target of the basic income office. This is the comparison between individuals that get or don't get the basic income. This is a traditional way of doing things. The objective here would be testing the effect of an unconditional basic income, but we won't be able to simulate the universality. I'm going very quickly. Yes, it's difficult to follow, but well, this has been randomly assigned in Catalonia. Now, the method is experimental RCT. Which are the pros? This is a very good model for testing causality. And some people say, well, if it's the same thing, you shouldn't be doing that. No, but yes, because here the amount is higher as compared to other pilot schemes. So the sample is higher also. So here we would have a higher statistical power to test some outcomes that weren't tested in other cases. And also it's unconditional. And in Catalonia, we don't have so many examples of that. So we don't have a lot of examples. And so the red line is that we cannot test the aggregated effects. And this is an example of the design. In red, you have the people that get it. In green, you have people who don't get the basic income, etc. The second design. Here we can test the aggregated effect. So here we compare municipalities with 3 saturation levels. Saturation means to what percentage of people we are giving this basic income. It's quite paradoxical because if you can say, if you want it to be universal, why do you have this saturation level? Well, because we want to test what happens when it is universal and when it's not. Here, the treatment that we suggested, and literature is quite new, that's why I say this is work in progress. So we suggested to take several municipalities, 10 participating and 10 control. 5 municipality would give it to 80% of population, to 5 to 20% of population, and the other municipalities will give it to no one, 0. So the method would be also an RCT. Pros is that this is a very clean model. It has been run in other places, so it has been tested and it works. Which are the cons? Well, follow-up problems because there are many municipalities and logistically this is very complicated. And also, statistically, there are issues. Potentially, the statistical power could be low. For example, this was run in Kenya. They did it with 600 towns that were smaller, but that was a huge number. So maybe these municipalities, maybe people aren't really varied, because if these are towns with 1,000 inhabitants, well, maybe we will lack some variability among the inhabitants. And also, another important point is that there aren't many services. If we want to focus on the social services demand or the health service demand, many of those towns don't have any health facilities. And so it's quite complicated. Do we have an internal validity? Well, it depends on the statistical power. And well, maybe it would be quite low. This means that if you have a few number of towns, the change of this basic income would need to be so big that you cannot capture that statistically. Maybe there is a change, but you won't be able to see it statistically. Last design? No, sorry, before that. Here you see an illustration of these 5 municipalities. You give to 5 municipalities 85%, then 20%, and then nothing. With that, we would have this group with 80%. This could be 100%. We said 80 because we wanted to have a bigger sample, but it could be 100. Then the group with 20% and the other group with 0%. So the beauty of that is to see how could we test the impact. Okay, if you say what happened in the group A in terms of outcomes as compared to the control, and then you compare that with the group of 20% as compared to 0. Why? Because the group of 20% would get the basic income, but only the lower incomes, okay? It could be 80, it could be 100. So we could decide 80 or 100, but the beauty of this, if this was possible, would be to see the spillover effects. If you compare the group A to the C, you see the spillover effect, and we go back to the participation in the employment market. So those are those that were unemployed, but now have the jobs of those that have now quit the job market. So that's how we can see these spillover effects I was mentioning before. Last design, comparison between municipalities with 3 levels of saturation. So here we have the same idea. What changes is the method. So here we're going to take 3 towns, one with a high saturation level, so 5,000 inhabitants, and 4,000 are treated. Low saturation, 5,000, you treat 1,000. Saturation of 0, that's the control group. So here the method is not an RCT anymore. It's not randomized anymore. So in India, they had this test on the double differences. Which are the pros? Well, logistically, it's feasible. It's closer to what we wanted to do here in our pilot scheme, and we could test the effects of universality. There is only one con, but it's very important, which is the parallel trends. We have to make sure or to try that these 3 towns, before getting the income, the basic income, they are quite as similar as possible, because then if they are really different, we'll never know if the changes were thanks to the basic income or not. This is difficult to find, but well, you can always try. So the internal validity will depend a lot on these parallel trends and the lack of bias. I don't have any more time. Well, you have 1 minute left. Okay, I will skip that because it's basically the same. but well, you see here 3, but it's exactly the same. So I do not take a look to the aggregated effects. Then design 2, there are many logistical and statistical problems. And the third design, we have potentially statistical issues. It can be more problematic than the second design in terms of the internal validity. So that's the status quo as of now. And we have time until the month of May, but these are the main working directions. There are some alternatives. I don't have time to go in depth. If you have questions, I will be able to tell you something. But then the external validation, many things have been said. Our short response, is it feasible to escalate? The short answer is no. The long answer is that it is very complicated to have a representative sample. What Leire said is a good idea, because then you have 2 towns that are more different amongst them. And of course, if they are similar, it wouldn't be the same, but it wouldn't be representative. So you wouldn't have this external validation anymore. But this is not a big deal, because at the end of the day, if you have external validation and you don't have the internal validation, it's not good. So the internal one is more important than having the external.
Methods and other questions quickly. I don't have any slide for this. When I was asked about quantitative and qualitative methods, from our perspective, we think that mixed methods are stronger than just picking one. With quality, you don't have the qualitative, and with qualitative, you won't have the quantitative. With a quantitative, you have the data, but you don't know why you have the data. You can have the qualitative effects. You have to ask people, you don't know why do we have more visits to the doctors? You have to go to hospitals. You will have to make focus groups with loads of interviews. Therefore, it is very powerful, and it's crystal clear if we combine both elements. As for the media, the only thing that I want to tell you, it is that they are very important, and they must be very responsible. If a media, they say, oh, that's nothing, that's not important, that's very boring, maybe it wouldn't be the best thing, but thanks to the pilot projects, we can progress. Maybe people will say, I don't want to get the basic income. Maybe people do not understand what does this entails. As our colleague in Finland said, it depends on the role that the media play. And the pilot would be great or very badly seen and perceived by society. We don't want to say to the media to applaud, but we want them to be responsible, to make their job, and to be accurate when communicating, because this is very important from the evaluation perspective. As for the ethical issues, I don't remember the question. Oh, yes. If people discuss about scientific data, whether the ethics, I think that they usually talk about ethic claims. When we talk about pilot projects, well, people do not deserve, you see different opinions, therefore, and you can see always the ethics inside. I think that scientific data, they can break the walls of some myths. Oh, when we talk about the basic income, people stop working. Who is going to stop working? Maybe those that have a precarious job. I will quit working if I only get 4 euros per day. And who is going to stop working? Maybe a mother, because she has to offer some care, and this care is something invisible today, and maybe these women cannot work because has to go to school at 8 a.m. to pick the boys at 5 p.m. and she doesn't have time. Maybe the pilot project will allow us to see why this happened, why they do not work. Maybe are they lazy? No, because they don't have time for caring the others. I think that we need a strict assessment, a great pilot plan to better understand where do the myths come from, to get rid of them, and why do people take the decisions that they take. That's all. Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Mireia. We are running out of time. So taking into account that everything has been very interesting, both interventions and contributions, and I'm sure that we'll have loads of questions, maybe just 2, 3 short, very, very short questions, please. Thank you. Thank you, Mireia.
Bueno, gracias Mireia per aquesta presentació.
Thank you very much for this presentation. It was crystal clear to me. I do have a question that has to do with something that you mentioned here, how to play with different saturation levels, high and low saturation. Does this has a relationship with the spillover effect? And I'd like to know what is the causal effect. Getting a basic income will have an impact on the level of participation of other people at the community level activities and actions. I do understand that the reason why people, they get involved more or less in a community activity level, maybe I think it should not be as causal, and maybe we should need more interviews and different qualitative service, right? Can you clarify the different levels of saturation to me? Yes. We do have another, we will have 2 questions and we'll go faster. I do have a question for you, Heikki. Thank you very much, Mireia. Thank you. It was an amazing example. You speak so fast. Heikki, I do have a question. Why, if participation in Finland was compulsory, why you didn't have a big number of answers to the survey? Why? You didn't want to make loads of surveys? Did you suffer technical issues for people to answer the surveys if they were compulsory? Yes, thank you for your amazing explanation, Heikki and Mireia. I do have a question, Mireia, for you. Well, it was not possible. You didn't have time to talk about it. To me, it is not clear enough. Just with a 5,000 people sample, it is possible to progress and to get over and to get to know the community effects and the universal effects right now, today. Is it feasible after your explanations? We will need maybe a broader and bigger sample, more than 5,000 people. Is this the diagnosis that you have for this design in the pilot project? Do you want me to answer? Yes, Mireia, go ahead. Okay, great. Thank you very much for the questions. Yes, Leire, I forgot to tell you something. We are working together with Julia. She is amongst us here at the audience. Well, she's here with us anyway. It was me to talk, but we are collaborating together. We discussed together with Julia why to add 20% in many papers. You can read about the spillover effect and many other effects. The idea that we approach things, if you compare 0 to 100, universability is not tested. You're only analyzing the aggregated effects. But how to test universality? You need a randomized control group that is not universal and only offer the basic income to the lower income society. It is universal, basic, unconditional, and we compare both the tested one and the non-tested one. And to compare with the universal one would be to offer in a village or a town around 20%, but we should better know what are the basic income population, maybe 10% compared with 80, 100%. If you take 100 and 0, yes, you will be able to better learn things and to know in a deeper manner more and more things. But there will be some aspects that we won't understand. Maybe the job market, it's okay. It's maybe there was an spillover effect, so there is an increasing level of job creation or not. If we add the 20% saturation group, yes, we will be able to measure that. Having said this, you can have interviews, focus groups, and to know what was the people's behavior. Well, we don't have to make only 3 groups, but to us, it's clearer if we make this proceeding. Well, another question. I don't have an answer for your question, how to progress. This is what we are assessing. At a first glance, I think that this design, which is to me the coolest one, to randomize at a village level, a town level, and to count with more municipalities, we will have a very low statistical powers. So we are kind of a skeptical. The difference model, it was interesting to us. They did it in India. We do have some doubts. We didn't see any paper published, so we are doubtful. We're doubtful about the issues, difference. We read this paper, but it was not an academia paper. And what we were thinking about maybe was with all these designs, but we could talk later if you want. Maybe we could participate in a seminar in the university, in a seminar for us to get assessed. Because these double fold differences, it's not good, but maybe it's a good way to test that. And it will be, did I answer to your question, Ruth? Oh yeah, it was you. Sorry, I did have two questions, all answered. Heikki, do you want to answer to your question, Heikki?
Yeah, sure. So the question concerned the survey data from Finland. So in Finland, basic income was a government project, and the government was mostly interested in employment effects. So enrollment was mandatory. The experiment was implemented through passing a law. And the registered data is completely reliable since registers have all information on people's incomes. The government was not so interested in well-being effects. They didn't have a baseline survey. They only carried out a survey at the end of the experiment period, and that was a kind of an add-on. So the well-being effects were not rigorously evaluated in Finland, and there was no. It wasn't obligatory to answer the survey, so it was in no way connected to payment of a basic income. So that's the short answer.
Bueno, doncs moltes gràcies.
Great, thank you very much. I'm sure that we'll have more questions, but we don't have time. Thank you very much for Heikki's and Mireia's participation, and we will carry on with our seminar. Thank you.